Chris. Faith and I have known Chris now. I don't know whether you realise, Chris, it must be 35 years ago you came to visit with your first owl to see one of our the junior watch groups. I think it was in Yatton Village Hall. And you've done a tremendous job for wildlife locally, but also beyond that on radio and TV. And particularly you've inspired us with help with the barn owls. It's good to have you here, and we're looking really forward to what you have to say about the impact of weather and climate on our wildlife. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. Really good to be talking to Yatwag again. Feels like a coming home. And I got to say that Tony's little spiel there sounded more like an epitaph, so I'm really worried. Really worried. So, okay. So basically what I'm going to do is I've got a really long talk to do, so I'm going to be a little bit like I'm on steroids tonight. I'm going to be going quite fast. What I want to cover is a little bit of, how weather happens, where we are in terms of the here and now of where we are in terms of just being a planet, so to speak. And then I want to zoom straight into some of the wildlife issues. I'm not going to be going into every single species. I just cannot do it. It's going to be impossible. So I'm going to be picking out things that I've either been involved with or that I know extremely well. And, I hate doing talks whereby it's so darn doom and gloomy that there seems to be no way out of this situation. I sound like I end up sounding like a conservationist who's doing a press release on the television or something, that it's all doom and gloom, it's the end of the world. It ain't the end of the world. So what I want to do towards the end is give some solutions, give some things that we can do. And a few of those might crop up as we go through. So anyway, I hope you enjoy it. It's going to be good fun. Hopefully towards the end, we'll understand a little bit more about some of the things that are going on and how serious they are. It's a good thing to start with the sun, because obviously it is our life force. It's the beginning of everything. It's where we start. Just to give a little bit of perspective, the temperature at the core of the sun is around about 15-16 million degrees centigrade. Now, at those temperatures and the pressure involved at the core of the sun causes 4 hydrogen atoms to fuse together, nuclear fusion, to produce what's referred to as the proton-proton reaction. So that those four hydrogen atoms create one helium atom, and what happens then is that I don't know if you can see. So we have that burst of energy which goes out through the radioactive zone, through the convective zone, and then out into space. These are the life forces that we so desperately need. What we have at the moment is an incredibly active sun, and it's say on this 11-year cycle, and it will sometimes be warmer, more active, and other times it will be cooler. Now, there's bound to be an effect on the planet. We've got a superb atmosphere that actually shields us from a lot of the harmful stuff that the sun throws at us. But in that cycle, there is bound to be times when there's more, for instance, sunspots, and you can see down the column here, you've got the average sunspots across the sun. And don't forget, those sunspots, because they're darker areas, means that that's a cooler part of the sun compared to the surrounding parts of the sun. So we do have historical examples, or perhaps there is some confusion between the two. But if we look back from 1300s until 1870, and you can see there, I'll read it out, the Earth experienced very low temperatures due to natural occurrence named the Little Ice Age. This was mainly due to a period of geological climate change combined with volcanic eruptions and with very low sunspot activity. The very famous Thames frost fairs, which used to occur quite regularly during those times. Now, it's been a long time since we've had those, but again, we see the effect that may be the effect between volcanism on the planet and also the sun in itself. If we look back even further in time, it's really fascinating. We think of ourselves as the great ones for changing the climate on the planet, but there is something that actually beats us. You can see on the estimated global temperatures, the one down below, I'll put my mouse over it down here. That's looking back at the past 500 million years. The one up here is different. I'll come to that in a minute. But what we have to do is probably go back to about 2.5 billion years on the planet. And what we find is a planet which is going through a snowball. It's basically a big, it's completely frozen up. And what fascinates me about that is what it's thought to be caused by. And that's runaway freezing, which is possibly caused by something called cyanobacteria. So early life form basically superseding other life forms by creating the first photosynthesis. So actually putting oxygen into the atmosphere. And what that actually caused, and again, probably as a coincidence of volcanic activity at the same time, is what's referred to as the Great Oxygenating Event, whereby suddenly, because these cyanobacteria can breed rapidly, they overtake everything else, remove the methane from the atmosphere, and at that time the planet's predominantly methane, and the other bacteria that come before the cyanobacteria are basically feeding off of that, and suddenly they're outcompeted by this new bacteria, which does the first photosynthesis, which leads to, of course, as we know today, what the plants actually do. So we've got a planet that's been through some incredible changes, but if you look at this graph below from 500 million years ago, what you can see there is various red, the warmings of the planet, and all over a very long period of time. I've got to emphasize that, a very long period of time. So the one to look at is the one here. So everything above is a world without polar ice caps, and the one below, of course, is with polar ice caps. So the planet's been through times when there's been no ice on the planet and times where it's been a snowball planet completely. But what you can see there from that graph, and obviously this is taken from geological records, what you can see from that is the slow period of time that it takes for those changes to take place. Now, if you look at the other one on the other side, this is really from the Industrial Revolution. So you're talking about 1880s up to present times. And what you can see there in blue is an annual average temperature and the 5-year average temperature. And obviously, the worrying thing about that is if we look here, we can see it's fairly stable, and then suddenly it rises quite dramatically. And this is the one which is really worrying up to present day. So another thing we should consider is that we often think of the Earth going around the sun in a kind of circle. It doesn't. It goes around in a almost elliptic. And something that's referred to as the Melanog Cycle is the fact that if you look down here, you can see that the orbit can change, where sometimes the Earth is actually further away from the sun. So even though it's still on that elliptic, it's spending time further away from the sun, and at other times it's closer to the sun. It's basically correcting itself from the pull of the sun. So you can see that eccentricity actually is around about 100,000 year period, where it's either closer to the sun or slightly further away from the sun. And the other thing to consider as well is this, precision. So basically what this means, you know those old-fashioned spinning tops we used to get? We used to push down on the top and let them go, and they go. And if you look at them, their axes, if you like, as they're spinning, do this. The Earth is doing exactly the same thing. But you see the period of time there is between 26,000 to 21,000 years from there and then north and south going over that way. So at the moment we are 23 degrees in the north direction, and we are gradually moving up to a point where we'd be almost upright and then over the other side. Ain't going to happen in our lifetime, folks. Don't worry about it. And the moon has an effect as well. We know about the moon's effect on the tides, and it will also have an effect on weather systems as well. Sometimes it's a little bit closer, and again, it's a little bit like I was saying with the Earth-Sun relationship. Sometimes it's a bit closer, sometimes it's a bit further away. It's a very complicated picture, this. I love this picture. I could just literally stare at this picture for hours. And I think it's the Apollo 8 astronauts that were the first ones to look back and actually say those words of, my goodness, it just looks so fragile. And those are very important words. But actually looking at this picture, we see quite complicated weather systems taking place there. We've got various storms around here. We've got some clear areas, perhaps high pressure areas here, low pressures down towards the Antarctic there. And how the weather actually works, obviously the majority of the sun's heat actually pours into those tropical areas. So around about here, and those create these, what I refer to as Hadley Sails, which rise up from the tropics. And as they move up, obviously, they go up into the upper atmosphere, then they move towards the poles either way. So they can either move south or they move north. And they're normally dropping their moisture in the subtropical areas. This gives you an idea of the kind of wind directions. And obviously, one of the things that's being talked about a lot at the moment is the Gulf Stream. So I'm going to concentrate on the Gulf Stream. We know, for example, that Greenland at the moment is predominantly iced over. And I looked at the temperature for central Greenland today, and it was minus 45. So that sounds pretty good, doesn't it? So a lot of our warm air, remember what we were just saying there about the Hadley Sails. So the sun basically warming up this area. So the area around the Gulf states here warms up and sends this warm current up through towards us, which then turns into the Atlantic drift. What's incredible is that the Gulf Stream itself, keeping all this area relatively mild, actually extends well into Russia, and it starts to lose its effect into Siberia. And I was looking at some of the temperatures, and I think the record temperature is minus 69.7 in Siberia when you lose the effect of the Gulf Stream completely. So what is currently, I've been looking at the Gulf Stream for about the last 11 years. And if any of you are interested in following it, you just go to NASA and you can follow what their satellites are picking up from the Gulf Stream. And you can look back through time as well to see how things are changing. And one of the implications of a warming planet, and this is obviously something that's been through before, as I've already alluded to, is the fact that a lot that powers the Gulf Stream is, of course, is the salinity of the water. So as the salinity drops, then of course the Gulf Stream becomes either weaker or actually changes where it is. So I saw a prediction that at the moment the Gulf Stream, the main part of the Gulf Stream, runs up through here, and it's been moving south over various years according to the data. But the information that came out at the weekend, which hit the national headlines, is the fact that it's actually weakening completely now. And one of the only things that can really do that is that warming planet. And what the warming planet, of course, will do is cause the Arctic to start melting. So that's pouring fresh water into salt water, so diluting the salt water. And that will cause the Labrador conveyor there to pour cold water straight, or fresh water straight into the salt area there of the main Gulf Stream, therefore weakening it. And that's going to have fairly big implications for us, because I think that we're about there. So if you actually switch off our predominantly mild southwesterly winds, we're on a line, I think, with Moscow and the Labrador coast. So if I was to make a prediction, I'm not a weatherman, but if I was to make a prediction that if you suddenly switched off the Gulf Stream, I would imagine what we would see are very much colder winters, but the reverse of that would probably happen in the summer. So we'd pick up quite a lot of this continental heat that we don't really get because we get the fresh air coming in from the Atlantic. So what we'll see is a lot more easterly winds going. So in the summer, the easterly winds can be incredibly warm. But in the winter, of course, as we know this year, they can be bitterly cold. Sorry, I'm slowing down a bit. I've got to speed up. We're now talking about, of course, the impacts of a warming planet caused by us, caused by what we're putting up into the atmosphere. And I think what's really exciting at the moment is that, so people like Tony and myself, and no doubt a lot of you as well, have been probably talking about this for many a decade, and it's now coming to the fore. And I think one of the things that's very exciting is it seems to be the young ones that are making it come to the fore by some of their actions. And it is wonderful to see a lot of politicians actually wake up and realize, smell the coffee if you like, that we really have got to do something. We've got to do something extremely quick. And one of the things that I think really gets to me that there's something dramatic happening with our weather at the moment is you never know whether it's going to be like this with this poor guy here in the picture, or, you know, this winter, this is a picture of my two dogs trying to get in the other week, trying to get in from the garden. So you never know whether it's going to be extremely cold or whether it's going to be like this. We're seeing more and more extreme events actually happening, and that's within the models. If you look at the models of what's going on, how, of course, wildlife adapts to that is really, really interesting. And I think this is where we as conservationists come into things. So obviously a picture of a dolphin around the British Isles. And already what we're seeing is movement of some species much further north, particularly in the North Sea, rather on the western side. So, I mean, I mentioned the dolphin there. So fish stocks obviously are on the move because of the changing temperatures of the water due to the warming planet. But also species like this, and I took part in several Radio 4 programs where we were sent off to look at puffins, hence I end up with great pictures like this. And one of the concerns was, and this is going to crop up several times in this talk, is the declining number of puffins, particularly in the North Sea area, on some of the islands there, that some of the declines have been quite steep. And what appears to be happening is that the sand eels that they actually feed on are moving further and further north. And that's obviously because they're going for the cooler temperatures of the water. And what was seen originally as a decline of puffins may be, in fact, a movement of puffins much further north, not an actual decline taking place. What's fascinating is that on the western side, when we finally got to, of course, somewhere that most of us will know extremely well, the islands off of Wales, we found that actually what they were recording, the scientists were recording there, was fairly normal numbers. So not the same extent of decline that was happening in the west as opposed to in the east. A couple of pictures just to go awe factor it. And the lovely thing about being able to travel around, which we can't do at the moment, is that I've spent a number of springs in France. So this is Provence. And I suppose it was around about 2012 that I first went out there. And basically why I was out there was leading wildlife holidays for people from this country with learning difficulties. Adults with learning difficulties. So And when I got out there, on the first year, there was a very high population of things like, simple things like blackbirds and song thrushes. And then the following year, I noticed that there was a decline of those taking place. And this isn't anything scientific, this is just observational. And by the third year I'm out there, and because I'm building up a relationship with the landowners there, suddenly it hits me what's going on and why birds that we associate with so much, song thrushes and blackbirds, I'm going to use them as the example, were declining so rapidly. And the basic reason for that was the fact that the whole of this area was experiencing a dramatic drought. And talking to the farmers, it was unprecedented. And it was really affecting the farmers, particularly the lavender crop, really putting them through some hardship. And I think in the end, although things have started to heal themselves there now, so they have got rain, the other thing that they weren't getting is that what you're looking at there is the pre-Alps. So they weren't getting the snow in the winter. And the snow melt, of course, was giving them a lot of the moisture through the early spring period. But the drought lasted for 2 to 3 years, and that had a devastating effect on crops, but also on very common species of bird as well. There are other factors involved in those declines. It's not just one thing, but this dramatic change of the weather condition in this area of Provence was certainly quite a major factor. So there's the blackbird. So obviously we experience similar things here. For example, we've had a few springs that have been exceptionally dry, and I'm thinking of 2013 in particular, very cold, very dry. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. Normally we have 2 to 3 pairs of blackbirds breeding in the garden, bringing it down to garden level. None of them were successful on that year. Other springs, we've had incredibly wet seasons, and the blackbirds have done exceptionally well, but other species haven't done so well. So it seems that for every weather event, it's good for some, it's not good for others, and the whole thing kind of turns on circles, so to speak. Due to be back with us soon. I think some people have seen them already. I can't believe it. It's incredible. I've seen sand martins in the Gordeno Valley. Well, that was a couple of weeks ago. Obviously, these are swallows. Swallows make an incredible journey to be with us. And if I just show you this picture of Africa. So they overwinter down here in South Africa. These are our swallows, okay? And they'll make this journey coming back up. And a lot of people think they cross straight over the Sahara to get to us. Well, they don't. They make this journey up through. And they normally leave about my birthday. So that's around about February the 8th. Remember that, folks. So they'll make this journey up starting in early February. And what they're trying to do is time exactly to be around this area for when the termites turn on the wing, when the termites go on the wing, so they can have this big feast here before they then make their way up through, up around the coast and up towards us. Well, what's happening is that there's a trend now for that emergence of the flying termites to actually be earlier and earlier. So the swallows are now mismatched in the time that they reach it to here, so they're not getting their major feast. So this is having an implication on how many swallows are then able to make that journey further north. So there's things happening there. There's also things happening here. So when they reach here, if we have a 2013 type spring, whereby we have sub-zero temperatures which are lasting well into April, basically there's no food for them here when they get here. There's no insects on the wing. There's not enough insects on the wing. This mismatch of time is incredibly interesting. Here's another species. This is the pied flycatcher, and these are this particular female pied flycatcher. I took a picture of this one on the Quantock Hills, where there's been a study being taken place for a number of years now, done by a very good friend of mine. And his study goes towards data being collected by Exeter University. And this is all tied up again with what I was saying about the swallows. So what they're finding is that the pied flycatchers, when they come back, they time their breeding perfectly. And Tony will be able to name this particular moth, but he's probably not going to come off he's not going to come off of mute for this, I doubt it. But you notice as around about the beginning of May, you start walking through woodlands and you have a moth caterpillar which hangs by a thread in the woodland. So the pied flycatcher times the hatching of its eggs to coincide with the maximum amount of these moth caterpillars that are hanging by threads in trees to be active by them. See, Tony's talking now. I can see him talking to Faith. They're talking about this. And what's happened is that actual emergence of those caterpillars has become earlier and earlier. And therefore, when the pied flycatchers come back, it's a mismatch. So what they're finding is that the number of pied flycatchers actually hatching and reaching to fledging is becoming less and less. And of course, if it's a bird which doesn't live very long, the implications for it are it either adjusts or its numbers start going down because there's not enough young to replace the adults. We see exactly the same thing taking place in our garden. I don't know how many of you have got blue tit, great tit boxes in your garden, but the great tits have been inspecting our boxes already. And that was back in February. And that's one of the earliest, I think, that we've had, even though we've been through a cold period. So they took the opportunity of 2 weeks of above average temperatures to actually start inspecting the boxes. Now, that's all well and good. But if we get a situation that we're going through at the moment where suddenly the temperatures collapse, they either go back to the beginning, or if it happens when they've got young, they're in big trouble. So you see this as an adult exchanging food with a recently fledged young, and I don't know if you can see what it's got in its beak, but it's greenfly. So those type of insects will be absolutely reliant on a fairly even temperature at that time of the year. And I remember talking to butterfly conservation about some of the effects on the colder springs we've started to get on the emergence of butterflies and the success of butterflies. And this can obviously be quite devastating for them as a species, but also for the things that feed on them. I'm going to talk about a tree now. And in order to introduce you to this tree, I want you to take you back to around about 18,000 years ago. The important thing here is right in the middle of the screen. Is the English Channel there and the land bridge, the bit that connects us to the continent, because of course we're going through a glacial period. Now, after this glacial period, things warmed up very, very quickly, and then they cooled down again. So we had a very sharp rise in temperature and then a very steep decline. And whilst the temperature was going up, the ice retreated quite quickly, and we ended up still with a land bridge, and that allowed many species from southern Europe to move up and constantly move up and actually then come into Britain. And obviously one of those species which made it across the land bridge, one of those groups would have been the trees. And this is small leaf lime, and this is a lovely story. This is basically small leaf lime. And so when they came into the country, when they came across the land bridge, they would have been able to come across as seed. And what happened, of course, then was that once the land bridge closes, suddenly the temperature declines quite dramatically. What's critical for the small leaf lime is obviously coming into flower, which you see here. Now, because the temperature dropped so dramatically, they weren't coming into flower. And what we find then is that we've still got a country fully populated by small leaf limes, particularly in southern England. Well, how did they do it? Well, this is how they did it. They walked across the landscape. So as the old trees come down, the young trees come up from the old trees, and then those would come down, and then gradually they would simply walk across the landscape. I actually did this with one of the leading tree experts as a story for The Living World. And what was fascinating is that on that particular year we were doing it, the consequences of climate change then, the warming of Britain, was actually coming through, because he was saying that more and more what we're seeing is small leaf lime coming into flower. So it didn't, and now it's starting to once again. So I found this story absolutely amazing, and in fact, I loved it so much I had to write a song about it. We are seeing new species. You only have to get down onto the Somerset levels to understand how and why the implications of a warming Britain is on the surrounding area. It's not just a question of the superb habitat that's being created down there. It's also the fact that it's much milder here. A lot of species that you see on the Camargue, for example, I was down on the Camargue about 10 years ago. I now see on the Somerset levels. I didn't need to go there, did I? I really didn't need to go there, because they're now here. And we see more and more new species breeding every single year because of the much milder conditions. And I'm sure that if it suddenly got colder, dramatically colder through the winter, a lot of those species wouldn't be able to exist here. This is a new species of bee that we've got in the country. I would say it's probably a combo, the fact that it's a newly evolved species and also the climate suited it, and that's the ivy bee. So I managed to go several times to Sweden, and one of the first reasons why I went to Sweden was to make a program under the series title of Planet Earth Under Threat. And we were looking at climate change, and I got to meet scientists in Sweden who were looking at dramatic effects of climate change and some of the history of climate change. And one of the things that they said when I was there, which was quite startling, was that it's the speed. And that's what I was saying at the beginning. When you were looking at those graphs, it's a fairly gradual change. It's the speed of change that is happening at the northern levels. And we actually went there to do a story about two foxes. So up in the tundra area, for example, there are Arctic foxes. And it's probably one of the last refuges in the EU. I'm going to say the EU now. So it's one of the last refuges in the EU for the Arctic fox. And what they're seeing is that what originally started out as a story of a bit of skullduggery, perhaps, from the red fox towards the Arctic fox, actually turned out that that wasn't the case. Because when we got there, what we found was actually happening was that the red fox wasn't killing or pushing out the Arctic fox. It was a habitat factor. And what was happening was that they were estimating that the tundra was receding, or was moving north at a rate of around about a quarter of a mile a year. And as it was moving north, it was being replaced by grassland and, of course, scrubland and young birch trees. And, of course, that suited the red fox, whereas the tundra suited the Arctic fox. And so you've got an expanding population of red foxes moving up. And of course, one of the most depressing things from that is that there was a wonderful bit on the radio whereby I was asking the question about what was going to be happening to the Arctic fox the further and further north it went, because there's only so far it can go before there's sea. And there was a pause from me, and the scientist turns around to me and says, "Don't even think about it, Chris. There's nothing you can do." And so it's what we're painting there is a picture of the end of the Arctic fox in the EU due to that change of habitat due to warming. Some of the dramatic weather that we've seen over the past few years, this is 2012. This is a devastating flood because it's not in the winter. This is actually during the main breeding season for example, things like barn owls. You're looking out across the Somerset levels, and we're looking at possibly 3 different hunting territories for barn owls. Well, folks, there's no such thing as an aqua field vole. They don't exist. So the main primary food source there for the barn owl disappears. It's gone. And barn owls were in the middle of the breeding season during this particular flood. And of course, trying to monitor nest sites was virtually impossible. But what the sites that we did get to, you were finding the same thing happening continually. What started off as a really good year, so they were having fairly big broods, and the brood numbers are affected by the amount of food that they're actually collecting, suddenly dwindled away to nothing. Devastating breeding season. It was having a double whammy effect because it was also affecting the adults as well. They were having to hunt in the only place that was left available with rough grassland, and that was the roadside verges, and that was where they were meeting their end. So that was a devastating effect on them. And then came the 2014 super flood event on the Somerset levels, which was in the winter. And once again, I'm using barn owl as the example because this is the particular one which I'm studying at this time. Again, the effects on barn owls were quite amazing. We did see some pairs actually trying to move, but of course it's difficult if you're a territorial bird to actually occupy an area there. And if there's an area there that's better suited for you, it's difficult to move there if someone else is occupying that area. You're stuck. You are stuck. And obviously, there was very high mortality of species such as barn owl. They wouldn't be the only ones by any means. I'm just giving you that as an example. So there's a picture of a nice female barn owl there. As I said, they weren't the only ones affected. Other species that were feeding on small mammals across those areas would have also been equally affected. And there's a whole host of species. You can add foxes, weasels, stoats, which being ground dwelling probably wouldn't have survived during those floods in any case. So we've seen some very dramatic weather events. We've seen some dramatic floods even this year. This is an area on Mendip hasn't got any rivers. Well, on this particular year, which was 2014 again, Mendip had a river above ground, that is. So we're talking about, we've been talking about the potential ice melt and its effect. Let's bring it down to an effect on, yes, we can look at wildlife, but what about people? So this is utopia. This is where we are at the moment. Now, all of this information I have not made this up. This has come from the UN. This is the United Nations information, okay? So anybody can do this. You go to the UN website and you can click this in. I've labeled it utopia because that's how it is at the moment. That's how we are now. But let's say the Greenland ice melt starts to accelerate, and it leads to, let's start off with, watch these pictures very carefully. Keep your eye on Yatten. Have you all got your eye on Yatten? Yeah? Watch. So let's now go to, so we've had some ice melt and it's led to a 3-meter rise in the sea around us. That's what it's going to look like. Ooh. What's that? That's interesting. Okay, from 3 meters, we're going to go to 6 meters, okay? Let's go to 6 meters. Interesting. I'm now watching waders a lot closer to home, by the way. Okay, let's go extreme. Let's go 9 meters. So a total melt of the Greenland ice sheet. No northern polar cap. Okay, move on. This is where I live, Portishead. I'm going to put an arrow where I live. At the moment, if I want to take the kiddies to the beach, it's about a 2-mile walk. Well, if we have ice melt, total ice melt, and we get a 9-meter rise, he'll be in the back garden. We got an answer, folks. Nature's got an answer to some of these issues. And I always remember a few years ago when Yorkshire was going through some tremendous floods, and they were employing people to throw logs in the rivers to slow them down before they got to the towns. We have got an animal that can effectively slow water down dramatically. We've got the beaver. And I don't know how many of you witnessed during one of the North Somerset Council's executive meetings, but Councillor Hugh James actually mentioned me by name when it came to flooding and said, you need to get Chris Sperring to get the beavers in. Yeah, I'm fascinated by beavers. They're not just ecologically rich in terms of what they bring with their biodiversity, but they are also superb engineers. And I'll show you this picture here. This is the type of size of tree they can actually bring down. This is my son, Tom. We're in Sweden. And this is a big birch tree. And they've just gnawn through it. And what they do is basically they break it up and they make these lodges and dams. And they actually clear areas of woodland and scrub as well. And what that does, of course, is allow light in by clearing scrubby areas. They let light into the water, they regenerate the water. The experiments done by the Devon Wildlife Trust, a site that I visited many times, where they're recreating Colne grassland. It's been an incredibly successful project, but not just from a natural history point of view. Just above where the site is an intensive farmland. And what Exeter University have been studying is the amount of nitrates that these dams and the filtrations that the beavers make actually sift out a lot of the harmful nitrates from the farm surrounding. So not only are they great at alleviating some of the pressure from our water, but also they are cleaning up some of the pollutants and at the same time creating an amazing landscape for biodiversity, and some of that biodiversity that we currently are going through that's on major decline. So bring the beavers back. Beavers in Yatton, Tony? They can't decide what's going on here. It was a flood and then it froze. So one of the fascinating things to happen in the last few years is I went to a conference about ducks in particular, and why the number of ducks in the West were declining. And there was various scratchings of heads, etc. And it was quite interesting when they put the map up of the duck species on the east. The number of ducks on the east was going up. So again, what's going on? Well, basically that's because continental Europe has become, so say, milder. Now, there's a problem with this. It doesn't always add up, but it becomes milder. And so over a few years, these migratory ducks have suddenly thought, hang on a minute, we don't need to travel away from our winter areas. There's enough food here and we don't get the ice that we used to, so we'll just stay. Or we won't travel as far. And we see that happening with other birds as well. I don't know if you've noticed, but I have. I mean, we had from 1993 right up till, I would say, 5 years ago, an average of 11 blackbirds in our garden, an average of 11 during the whole of the winter period. And these would be Scandinavian blackbirds or blackbirds from further afield. And we've had two this winter, that's all. And when I contact my friends in Sweden, they say, we always have a hookup on Christmas Day. We always have a really good chat. And they say, yeah, we've got blackbirds still in the garden. And what they say is the 80% bailout of birds that used to happen during that late autumnal period just doesn't happen anymore. And so these birds that we were familiar with in the winter, they're just not coming in the number that they used to. And it's not just them. We also find species such as wintering long-eared owls, a bird which I studied intensively through the 80s and the 90s as a wintering bird, wintering in groups, some of those across your areas there in Yakwag. They're not there anymore. And the reason they're not there is not because they've declined, it's because they don't need to come. Or do they? So species like, for instance, fieldfares and redwings, we don't see those in the big flocks that we used to see. And again, they don't need to come. And this is what our friends in Scandinavia are saying. This is 2013, showing you the catastrophic year we had for production of pulli in the nest. It was pretty bad there. So this is barn owl, sorry. It was pretty bad in 2012 when we had that major flood in the summer, and then we had a double whammy of 2013, that very, very cold spring there. And it had a catastrophic effect because, I normally monitor around about 100 to 200 nesting sites for barn owls during the breeding season. On one farm that normally produces, it's a 1,000-acre arable farm in Somerset, and it normally produces an average of between 30 and 40 owlets per year. On this particular year of 2013, it only produced 3. That is a dramatic difference. So when the weather conditions are like this, so far I've been all doomy and gloomy, haven't I? But actually, snow can be incredibly beneficial to wildlife. Okay, for some, it's not so good. To scratch around looking for food if it's abnormal conditions. But what it can do is, if we have a prolonged period of snow and a prolonged period of frozen conditions during the winter, it can literally lock things down. So, for instance, these butterflies that are they're in an old gun emplacement down on the levels. If the temperature remains down, there'll be more of them available as soon as the temperatures increase to come out. But the trouble is, if the temperature during the winter goes up, down, up, down, up, down, the problem with that is that they'll become active. There's no food for them, so they'll die. The same thing, of course, happens with bees, with wild bees. And I keep records, for example, of when I've seen bumblebees in the garden. Go back 3 years and there were bumblebees active in my garden for every month of the year. I haven't had that this year. So it's obviously been a bit colder, so they've locked down for longer. We've just started to see bumblebees now, actually last week. They were just starting to emerge and come out. And so actually having a layer of snow can be like nature's rolled out this huge duvet, and particularly for things like small mammals. So again, taking information from Scandinavia, what they're finding there is that they haven't had a really good lemming year and vole year, probably back 20 years ago, when they had the last big eruption of lemmings and voles. And the reason for that is simply because their winters don't lock down like they used to. So they would start in October, frozen up, snowy, and that would be it all the way through until March. Now they have freeze, thaw, freeze, thaw, freeze, thaw, and that's devastating. Particularly for small mammals and things like, they can't build up their numbers underneath that lovely white duvet. And of course they can keep feeding, because I'm sure you've noticed that below that layer of snow, there's always an air gap. And that air gap can get quite warm. There's still enough light coming through. The grass and vegetation can actually grow within that microclimate. So small mammals can still feed. It's also, we're going through a stop-start with this at the moment. We've had some frogs back, and then now they've stopped again. And as soon as we come out of this cold period, some more will come in. And what was fascinating for me was, if you go back to 2010, when we froze up through Christmas and beyond Christmas, they seem to all move in one go. And again, that's much better, because they're all meeting up together, as opposed to this, some go then, some go then, some go now. And then it freezes, so whatever they've put down in the pond, like spawn, freezes up completely. I'm sure it's adapted to cope with it, but what it's not adapted for is constantly freezing up, thawing, freezing, thawing. So this is Yasmaland during the winter period. And this is the 2013 effect. So this is actually a picture taken in April 2013 up on the Mendip Hills. This is some dead magpie. And when I examined this magpie, it had died of starvation. Magpie is an incredibly strong bird, incredibly robust bird. But this freeze up actually started in January in 2013 and went right the way through till April. The whole of the Northern Hemisphere seemed to be affected by this. Just one walk around this one tiny little field on the Mendips also produced this meadow pipit as well, which again was incredibly thin. And because it was occurring around about that April period, this is from Royal Portbury Dock, I was finding chiffchaffs moving in big numbers, but they weren't singing, they weren't in the bushes, they were hugging the water. They were right down on the Reen ditches. They were doing what this one's doing here, hanging around the sedge and the reeds. Why is that? Well, because the water was slightly warmer than the surrounding land. And that's where the insects were that they could actually try and feed up on. So again, this is what I would refer to as a devastating weather event. And of course, things like that can affect a lot of our small mammals, and the implications for those I've already talked about. This is the short-tailed vole, by the way. But those harsh conditions that I've been talking about, whether it's extreme heat or whether it's extreme cold, can actually lead some vegetation to go into stress mode. When it goes into stress mode, it then goes into survival mode and can actually produce these quite amazing outbursts of sudden flower and berries, which will obviously be there to feed many things, but it goes into survival mode so that generations can live on. So it's not just, we don't just see this with scrub plants, we also find this with trees as well. It's by no coincidence that, for instance, a good beech mast year will follow some extreme weather event like a 2013 freeze up, or a major flood event, or a major heat event. And if you're producing things like this, this is nature's way of healing, if you like. Not only is the plant going through life support role, but it's also, as a byproduct, it's healing the nature around it. So you find these accumulations then of seeds and nuts which have been gathered by, these are cherry pips gathered by a wood mouse. And this will have major implications. So if you get an autumn like this, that's followed some major weather event, nature is trying to repair as fast as it can. And so by producing all of those seeds, by producing all of those nuts, this leads to more wood mice going through that winter, which will have implications for the predators of wood mice. So you can predict from a major weather event to a major outburst of nuts and berries, to an upturn in the wood mouse population overwintering, to a good tawny owl year the following year. So it's easy to make those predictions. I haven't talked about heat yet and the extremities of heat, so we'll go on to that now. What I'm already noticing, and having spent time in France during those extreme heat events and tremendous drying, is how quick the grass can grow out. And I wonder if our grasslands are going to change. I wonder if we're going to have a more Mediterranean type grass system. So this is one of the margins that we create on farms as part of our barn owl conservation work. Now, if we get an extreme heat event on this, so let's say we have a few weeks of temperatures up 28 and into 30s, up to 35, etc. This is all going to burn off here. And it's not going to be very, I don't mean burn off as in catch fire. It's all going to look like that there. But here, obviously in the longer grass, what we tend to find is that the moisture is retained down at the bottom. So this will survive and harbour obviously a lot more wildlife living in that particular environment. I'm wondering also, because if you look, you don't have to, you can look at weather records and you can see that we're experiencing more summers with days of above 30 degrees. And the implications, for instance, for barn owl conservation are huge. For example, no longer can I think about putting up pole boxes. And the reason for that, and barn owl nesting box on a pole that's totally exposed. And the reasons for that is that if you have more than a few days above 30 degrees, those young, if they're young inside, are going to overheat. So that's a real problem and something that we must think about for the future. So putting boxes into trees is going to be a lot more what we'll be trying to do in the future to offset that heat effect. This is a barn owl leaving a building. The stone building's relatively safe. This one's in a dovecot, so it's got plenty of air running through. But we should think about, for instance, putting boxes in tin buildings. In the old Dutch barns, enclosed tin buildings, because of course the tin is going to heat up quite dramatically. These are things we need to think about. I'm nearly at the end. Phew, woo-wee. Okay, so we need to look to the future. We need to know what it is we can do to offset some of the things that may mitigate this. And obviously, people are talking about tree planting. I'll come on to that in a minute. But we also must think about, we've talked about climate change, but also the other thing that's happening on the planet. I try not to separate these two issues, is the tremendous die-off of nature that we've got. And I'm trying desperately not to separate those two things. I think the two things are linked, but of course we're having that adverse effect on nature in many different ways. So for example, when I look out across a landscape like this, I immediately think of things like, how can nature repair itself within an area like this that's fairly intensively grazed? Well, straight away, what I do is take this back in time. So you can see the hedgerows there, and the hedgerows are relatively small. Think about letting them go. Think about letting them get it a bit higher, but also think about the management of the grass itself. Where you've got vast open spaces like this, is there any way where you can encourage, for instance, you've got a group of trees there, encourage those group of trees to move out? And I emphasize the word move out on their own. Can you make these hedges wider? And can you have more hedges across these fields, break up the huge size of the fields so you have smaller compartments of fields? Is that efficient? Is that something we can do? And also the nature of the grass. Can it be, you can see there's grazing obviously taking place here. When we come out of lockdown, I'm going to visit a farmer in Somerset who reckons he's got a fantastic grazing system that will suit rewilding. So I can't wait to get down and see what he's up to down there. But is there a way in which we can graze, that we can have rewilding, which is a very quick way of nature repairing? Trees, obviously trees, it's fairly contentious here at the moment. I don't know what it's like with you, but trees are extremely important. I've used this picture many times because there's a real human thing happening here. These are three beautiful oaks. So here at this end, you can see this is a Turkey oak, you've got the English oak, and you've got the American red oak. And they're all over playground, a huge playground. And this is great because these trees are offering some very important shelter. So we took the children there, and I took a temperature reading outside. So I was here taking this photograph. The temperature reading outside, I think it was 29.2. I think I've got that right. I've got it written down. So 29.2 degrees C. But all across the playground where there was sheltered areas from these trees, it was 10 degrees cooler. Those trees were really offering something incredibly valuable. And also what these trees can do is, we've been talking about floods. There's great talk in Portishead at the moment about what Councillor Hugh James was talking about, flooding in one particular area of Portishead. The one thing that's we haven't got, for example, in the valley that I live, is good wet woodland. Wet woodland is an incredibly important habitat. And we know that, for example, these oak trees are literally soaking up hundreds of gallons of water. And so maybe that is something that we should be thinking about redressing and actually recreating in some of our floodplain areas, woodland again. That again will be very controversial. There's a lot of controversial things. And that's the trouble when you start suggesting things. It's always wise to keep your eye on things. Tree benefits. So I've deliberately mentioned water in that last, or the ability to help with flooding, and in that last cell. So in this one, we can go through the other ones. There's the obvious thing about oxygen, food, shelter, medicine, tools, timber, paper, firewood, aesthetic value, economic value. Is a bit of research I did actually looking at America, and I found that estate agents in America were saying along the lines of, if you've got a house that you're selling with a tree or a few trees in your garden, it actually adds value to your house by 7%. So I asked a few estate agents around here if the same thing, and they said, yeah, it can add value to a house. Obviously, there can be pros and cons with that in terms of the safety of that tree, etc. But ordinarily a tree is seen as pleasing aesthetic value and economic value as well. Pollution control, again, obvious. Lots of research done in London about the fact that near major road systems, if there's trees, those trees, and particularly tall hedges as well, are helping by soaking up a lot of that pollution and giving us oxygen back instead. Shade, which I've already mentioned, that's going to become so important in the future when we come to plan our towns and our cities, thinking about that if the temperature is going to constantly in the summer go above 30, you're exposing people, particularly if the sun's hitting the tarmac or the concrete straight back up into the face, you're exposing people to very high temperatures in towns and cities. So one of the things that I think is going to be needed to be really important is how we plan some of these really special trees that can offer this shading. And of course, energy collector. Now, this particular pot here, you can see this is a chestnut growing in here. And this one was planted by my 2-year-old son. It's now a lot bigger than that because he's 4 years old now. And very importantly, this one is going to go out into our community. But can I just say that he grew it on from the actual chestnut itself. And it hasn't been brought in from the outside. This is a very local tree. And the actual adult tree from this is literally just up the road. And so we hope we're going to be putting something back. And interestingly, as I'm sure some of you know, I'm one of 3 founders of Wild Portishead, and I'm sure my other 2 colleagues are watching at the moment, so I've got to be careful. Basically, when we did a big talk in for the town, for the public in Portishead in the folk hall, which was absolutely packed with the public. And one of the things I said in there, and somebody said to me afterwards, I was saying about trees and how important it is. I wanted 30% extra trees within the urban area. One of the important things then came after that when somebody came up to me and said, why'd you do this? You know, why'd you do this? And I said, I don't do it for myself. I haven't got long left on this planet. I'm doing it for all the young ones. And I'm doing it for you. You're younger than me. I want you to have, and I want you to be more connected to nature. It's so, so important. We can only see what's happened with this pandemic to see how far away from nature we've really become. Tree planting is taking place, as you all know. And again, we all know the controversies that surround this. This is a tree planting scheme that I actually came across. And I don't know if you can see this, all the fresh trees that have been planted here. This is all scrub areas here, and scrub area here, woodland here, woodland here, and woodland here. My argument is they didn't need to do it. There's young natural trees growing here. You can see them sticking up here from the scrub. They've actually cleared an area of potential woodland where they could have just said, pull out, let it go. So there's a lot of effort taking place where perhaps it doesn't need to be taking place. Also, it would have saved an awful lot of plastic if they'd let the scrub be the natural tree guard. And again, the same thing here. This is Battery Point. This was very controversial with the public. I think tree planting is good where you can't do anything else. But the thing is, I don't know if you can see my arrow, there's a wood here. What they could have done is just fence this off here and just said, right, woodland, come on out on your own. And the reason why it's controversial with the public is because it's an open space which has been planted. And that's why a lot of the public don't like it, because it's their public open space. I think we need to sort these things out, and we need to do it with proper dialogue. One of the reasons why I don't like plastic guards is that this is a tree planting scheme from 20 years ago. Still has the plastic around it. So if you were to say to me, right, we're going to we're going to increase the tree areas. I've deliberately not put up anywhere in North Somerset because I know I'll get stick for it. So this is an area where I've been doing some owl work, and they're going to be going through down here. They're going to be going through some tree planting. Now, if this was my project, the first thing I would do is look at this Google Earth picture, and I would say, right, here we have tree belts all the way down through here. I would join these up by natural means, and I would also expand them through grant aid to the local farmers, which could be done through, for example, DEFRA schemes. And I would look at areas where there's private landowners that want to be involved with schemes. I know that there's one up around here. You can fill in that area there completely. There's ways of doing it without tree planting in itself. And I know it's all called rewilding, but there is a difference between rewilding and tree planting. And I think if you let an area go, that's more rewilding. And you shouldn't, if you're into rewilding, you shouldn't be afraid of management. Management happens. Nature manages itself. Nature can be quite brutal to a tree at times. So there's easy ways of doing this, and I think quite cost effective as well. There's some beautiful areas down here, and I can't wait to get back down and get involved with this community down here. It's not just when you're offsetting with trees, we put all our eggs in one basket with trees. Grassland is absorbing carbon, flowers, and also peatlands. It's never ending. So we shouldn't put our eggs in one basket. We should think about some of the grasslands and how we actually treat those. This is the jewel in Portishead's crown. That's my son there. I took this picture because I was trying to imagine it, how it would be, how it could be if we did something else. I wasn't even thinking about trees, expanding the tree line at all. Do you know what I was thinking of? This is going to please Faith. This was my vision, Faith. So look at that now. And this was my vision of how it could be. And immediately you could say, well, you've excluded the public from that. No, you just mow through paths so that the public can still utilize it. You can put picnic benches in, but what a big difference that would be for wildlife within that particular area. We're not the only ones talking about this. Some people are way ahead. And what I'm talking about there is community wildlife groups. This is North Curry, and these are the residents of North Curry. This is things that they've been doing. They've been expanding their woodlands. A brilliant project down there. It's only small scale, but from what they've done, they're a little bit like, they're going to be like Yatwag. From small scale, they will grow, and that whole idea will grow. And they've got the public behind them in that particular area as well. Really near the end, nature is extremely important to all of us. And going through the pandemic, we've all been affected by it in different ways. I defy anybody that says they haven't been through this 100%. I know I haven't. And what we're going to see is government is going to have to look seriously at things like mental health issues. And one of the things that I would use this platform to say to government and say to local authority, nature is out there, nature is free. And what we can do is use nature to help heal once we can finally get back out again. But it is a tremendous healer. For those of you that know me personally, I know lots of you do, you will know that the older sibling here is Mark, and a lot of you will know the problems he's got. He smiles and he loves being out in nature. It calms him, it settles him down, it relieves his anxieties and his stresses. I know there's a lot more to it than that. I'm not a professional mental health person at all, but I know the calming effect that nature can have. And what I'm trying to emphasize there is that we need our nature spaces, but our nature spaces need to have nature in them. It's a quote from me from the folk hall. Portishead, where there is life, there is always hope. And this is my picture of hope. This is a picture from Europe. This is a bird which is one of the rarest of our owls, a bird that I've studied for a long time, nesting in the middle of a city in Europe. And the reason why it's successful is not just because of the flowery window box that it's nesting in, it's because the local authority don't overmanage the parks, the cemeteries, the verges. It's got food. And the picture on the other side is one of my young ones getting close and connected with nature. Be prepared. I haven't mentioned farming in this. I wanted to, so I'm just going to let that picture sum it all up. We are not going to escape the effects of dramatic climate change. We are a part of it. It will affect the very food that we eat. What we need to do is learn from observing nature and how it is affected, and we can start learning and preparing for the future. Community, my friends, is the way forward. And you know, as a group, how I have always thought, and I know Tony and Faith think the same way. And I'd like to dedicate this last slide to somebody who's not with us, but was there right at the beginning, who, if she was here now, she would be loving the task and rising to the occasion. I'd like to dedicate this last slide to Sue Grant. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. Right. Have we got some comments and questions, Julie?
No, we haven't got any comments and we haven't got any questions.
Right. So I think you've stunned everybody there, Chris. Really have with that. I mean, what can you say on some of it? It just seems such a gigantic task in a way. But as you say, the hope is in our actions that we take now.
I think we can make it easier for ourselves. I'm going to sound like I'm flogging the same horse all the time, but what we need to do is we need, you and I were a part of LA21 biodiversity action plans. What we've been through is a heck of a lot. What we need now is a complete ground up approach to local conservation. What I mean by that is it's action on the ground. Yakwag have how many years experience? So, you know, it's there for the taking. And actually, in terms of being, it's cost effective. You know, our government and our local authorities are going to be strapped for cash after this pandemic. So let the people loose in their local areas to start fixing the nature problems and the climate change issues, and let the authorities facilitate that.
Yeah. Are there any questions, though, Julie? Has anyone come?
No,
no one wants. Yeah, but does anyone want to ask from the audience a question? By the way, I think you were talking about the oak tortrix moth.
Oh yeah, thanks, Tony. Brilliant. I loved your idea, by the way, of community moth trapping. I think that's something we're going to have to do in Portishead. That's a brilliant idea. That is good.
It's the thing is, some of these ideas aren't new, but it's just getting them into place. You know, need helpers.
So we got a comment from Susan who says, "Isn't there a contradiction between championing beavers and trees?"
Not really, no, because they manage the area around the water. I think that there was an original thought that they shot off into the forest, brought down trees. There was lots of talk about them damaging forestry plantations and things like that, and that's not so. When I was in Scotland with Autumn Watch, I was presenting a lot of the live stuff there on the beavers, and during the daytime, because we were doing it at night, so during the daytime I was going to find out where the beavers were taking their trees, and they weren't taking them 50 meters away from the actual water itself. They won't go beyond that area. They can't, because of course, for example, their native areas where there's their predators, they would become prey. They would be caught by wolves. Their kits can be caught by otters. Otter in this country is one of their biggest predators, for example. Not them as adults, but them as young ones. And so no, I don't think there is. And I think the other thing that they do is I'm sure you're familiar with coppicing. So if you go into a beaver area, the first thing you notice is you think there's some real professional coppicers about, but actually it's not. It's beavers. They coppice and they regenerate the trees. So, and they want that because that's what they're feeding on. They're creating their garden, so to speak. No, I think they're plus trees. They're pro trees.
Right, Julie, we've got a couple of questions.
Yeah, a comment from Debbie who says, "Hi Chris, what's the best thing we can do in our own gardens to help wildlife?"
Well, we've just started a project in Portishead with Wild Portishead. Leave a meter. So you you basically get a square meter and you put that down in your garden, and then you don't manage that and see what comes up.
That's anything.
So yeah, and some people are saying, well, we've already got this area here, so we're saying no, that doesn't count. You've got to create another one.
Yeah,
because we're greedy. So yeah, I think that's good. What I've done in my own garden, you might be interested in, and hello Debbie, is that a long time ago we got rid of all the non-native border plants, and we put in things like hawthorn, holly, hazel, all the natural stuff to create a natural hedge right around. And then we gradually increased the number of trees. And again, everything's local. Everything I've got is local. So for example, all the hazel and all the hawthorn and blackthorn, they're all shooters which have come up in the local field, and I've just pulled them out and put them straight into the garden. And they're all growing absolutely wonderfully. And so, and when I started doing that, I think one of the best species that came back and took up residence and increased in number was the house sparrow. And that only really happened when our native plants started to mature.
Yep.
And that's because our base insect level went boom, and they had something to feed their babies.
Yeah. Small leaf lime, that's what you need to get into your garden.
It's possible.
Yeah, we've got a bit. We're very proud of it. Yeah. It's older than the church.
Wow. Oh, sorry. Can I just finish with Debbie saying pond as well? And pond doesn't have to be something that's... Talk to Colin there about ponds. He'll sort you out with a pond.
Yeah. Well, even a meter square pond would be...
Yeah.
That's all you need. Yeah.
I reckon I've got the only pond that has absolutely no wildlife in it.
Oh. Well, when this is over, have a chat with Higgy. He's on here somewhere. He's disappeared again now. I can't see him.
All right. Yeah, I see him.
Is he there? Yeah. Have a chat with Higgy. He's your guy.
Okay. Thanks.
Right. Any more questions before we close, Julie? Any others?
That's it.
Yep. Right. Okay. Well, I'd just like to thank you, Chris, for coming along with, I mean, there is so much there, but I think if we can just take a little bit in our own way and do something in our own gardens, that's a brilliant thing to do. I think what we need to do also is make sure that those people who are custodians of public spaces and of our land, our nature reserves, do understand that we mean business, and we would welcome a dialogue about how we can all work together for these very important aims. And it's for the younger generations, you know, and I think that's very important. Thank you so much, Chris, for your time, and thank you all for coming along. This is being recorded. I don't know how we make that available. I think we're going to create a YouTube link to our website. But don't forget about the bird book. And don't forget about our next talk, which I did remember was the 25th of March. When we're talking, we've got a talk by Sarah Dale, Planning for Bats. That also I'm going to be looking forward to. Thank you all very much.
Hey Tony, do you want that jam now? You got your bass ready?
Yeah. We'll do that separately now. Okay. Yeah.
Take care, everyone. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Good night, and thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank you all for coming. Thank you.